Have you ever woken up at 3 a.m., eyes wide open, heart racing, unable to fall back asleep? Perhaps you've wondered, why on earth is my mind racing at this hour? We all know that sleep is vital, but what if I told you that waking up at 3 a.m. might not be a coincidence? It might just be a call, a message, a nudge from the universe, or even from God himself. And here's the big question. What if that moment is an invitation to see something deeper? Let's start with something simple. God is always at work in our lives. We know this. It's not a theory, it's a truth many of us have experienced. The challenge, though, lies in how often we notice it. How often do we miss the moments when God is trying to get our attention? The world moves fast, too fast sometimes. And we find ourselves on autopilot, consumed by tasks, by noise, by expectations. But then, in the quiet of the night, when everything slows down and the world outside is asleep, something unexpected happens. We wake up at 3 a.m. But why? Why at this hour? First, let's consider that 3 a.m. is a time of stillness, a time when everything around you is silent. No distractions, no external noise, just you, your thoughts, and God. In these precious, quiet moments, God can speak in ways that our busy, cluttered minds cannot hear during the rush of the day. This is the time when we are most open, most vulnerable, and therefore most receptive to divine guidance. So, in the night, God speaks clearly when the world is still. Secondly, it's in these early hours that God invites us into reflection. Think about it. When we wake up in the middle of the night, we're forced to stop and evaluate our thoughts. What are we thinking about? What are we anxious about? What are we praying for? That moment at 3 a.m. is an opportunity to reflect on where we are in our lives, what we're doing, and where we're headed. It's an opportunity for self-awareness, for realignment with purpose. Perhaps God is urging you to reconsider something, an action, a relationship, a direction, something you may not have been able to see in the noise of your waking life. Now let's think about the deeper reason for these wakeful moments. It might be a stirring in your soul to pursue a dream, to reach out to someone, or to make a difficult decision. Those early morning hours aren't random. They are a time when we can hear him most clearly. Finally, I want to leave you with this. What if this waking up at 3 a.m. isn't just a disruption? What if it's an invitation? An invitation to pause, listen, and reconnect. You see, when we wake up in the middle of the night, it's a chance to reset. Maybe you've been rushing through life, and God is saying, I need you to stop for a moment and hear what I have to say. It's not a punishment, it's a divine reset. It's an opportunity to check in with your soul, with your purpose, and with God. So the next time you wake up at 3 a.m., don't view it as an interruption or a random event. Instead, take a deep breath and listen. Take a moment to reflect, to pray, to reset, and to invite God into your heart at that still hour. Maybe it's in those very moments that you'll find the answers, the peace, and the direction you've been seeking all along. In the fast-paced world we live in, moments of stillness can feel like a rare luxury. Between our responsibilities, tasks, and constant digital distractions, finding a place of silence and reflection often seems impossible. However, when we wake up at 3 a.m., we are thrust into a situation where stillness is not a choice but a requirement. In that moment, the world outside is quiet, and everything that usually competes for our attention has faded away. It is in this exact stillness that God can speak to us most clearly. At 3 a.m., the noise of the day has long ceased. The streets are empty, the phones are silent, and the chaos of the outside world has quieted down. In this sacred moment, we are given the opportunity to tune out the external distractions and become more in tune with our inner selves, as well as with God's presence. The power of this stillness is profound. It is often in the silence that God's voice is the clearest, not because he speaks louder, but because the distractions are fewer. It is in these moments of peace that we can hear his gentle nudges, whispers of guidance, and the profound truths that often get drowned out during the busyness of the day. When life is hectic, it's easy to overlook the small promptings of God. The noise of daily life can drown out our ability to listen to ourselves, to the world around us, and most importantly, to God. The constant flow of information, tasks, and engagements leave little room for reflection. However, the quiet of 3 a.m. provides the space needed for clarity. In the stillness, we have the opportunity to reconnect with our thoughts and reorient our hearts towards God. This moment of peace becomes an invitation to listen to what God is speaking into our lives without the interruptions that fill our waking hours. In the Bible, we see examples of God calling his people during times of solitude and stillness. When the prophet Elijah fled to the wilderness, he encountered God not in the great wind, earthquake, or fire, but in a gentle whisper, 1 Kings 19:11 and 13. The power of that moment lay in the fact that Elijah was alone in a quiet place, ready to hear God's voice. Similarly, the 3 a.m. stillness provides a context in which we can hear God in a more intimate and personal way, just as Elijah did. In a world that pulls us in multiple directions, the stillness at 3 a.m. helps us to clear away the noise of the world, allowing God to speak to our hearts without the clutter. Moreover, stillness doesn't just enable us to hear God's voice more clearly, it also allows us to reflect more deeply on our own lives. In the quiet of the night, we are forced to confront our own thoughts and emotions. Our mind may race with worries, doubts, or unresolved issues, but within that space, God can help us process those feelings. The power of this stillness lies in its ability to offer clarity, to help us work through the things we might otherwise push aside during the day. It becomes a time for reflection, self-awareness, and ultimately transformation. It is during these still, quiet moments that we can experience breakthroughs, release anxieties, and gain a renewed perspective on our lives. It's important to recognize that stillness is not the same as inactivity. It's not about sitting in silence and doing nothing. Rather, it is about intentionally choosing to pause and listen. It's about creating space in our lives for God to speak, for our hearts to heal, and for our minds to be renewed. The quiet of 3 a.m. invites us into that space, a space where we can embrace stillness as a gift rather than a disruption. Our pause, in those moments, we have the opportunity to reflect on our purpose, hear from God, and align ourselves with his will. The power of stillness is transformative. It allows us to disconnect from the noise and reconnect with the divine. Waking up at 3 a.m. might initially feel like an inconvenience, but it is in fact a divine invitation to embrace the power of quiet. In the stillness, we are given a chance to listen more closely, to reflect more deeply, and to align ourselves more closely with God's voice. And in doing so, we find peace, clarity, and a deeper understanding of his plans for our lives. When we wake up at 3 a.m., our minds often race with thoughts, worries, and emotions that have been building up throughout the day. These early hours provide a unique opportunity for reflection, an invitation to pause and examine our lives in a way that we might not do during the busyness of the daytime hours. In the quiet of the night, when everything around us is still, we are forced to stop and look inward, allowing us to connect with our true selves and with God in a deeper way. Reflection at 3 a.m. is different from the usual hurried reflection that happens when we are simply trying to catch up with our thoughts. It's not about finding quick solutions to problems or making decisions on the fly. Instead, it's an intentional process of contemplating where we are in life, what we've been doing, and where we are heading. Often, in the hustle of daily life, we push aside the deeper questions that are bubbling beneath the surface. We get so caught up in our routines that we forget to check in with ourselves, what we value, what we're feeling, and whether we're living in alignment with our purpose. But 3 a.m. is different. It's a sacred space that allows for this deeper introspection, a time when we can be honest with ourselves and with God about where we are and what we need. These quiet hours, we are often confronted with our own thoughts and emotions in their rawest form. Without the distractions of work, family, or social obligations, we are left with our inner selves. This is when the truth often emerges. We might realize that we're carrying burdens that we haven't fully processed, or that we're holding on to unresolved emotions from past experiences, or that we're holding on to unresolved emotions from past experiences. These early morning reflections can be uncomfortable because they force us to face these truths, but they are also an opportunity for growth and healing. The stillness of 3 a.m. creates a space where we can reflect on our pain, our triumphs, our mistakes, and our hopes without the fear of judgment or the rush of needing to act. During these moments of reflection, God often reveals things we might have missed or ignored during the day. He might bring to the surface the relationships that need mending, the dreams that have been forgotten, or the direction we've been avoiding. God is always speaking, but sometimes we're too distracted to hear him. The stillness of the night offers a chance to clear away the noise and really listen to his gentle voice. Through reflection, God brings clarity. He helps us see our lives from a new perspective, reminding us of our worth, our purpose, and the path he set before us. It's in these early hours that we are reminded that God is with us, guiding us, loving us, and helping us navigate the complexities of life. Reflection also helps us acknowledge our progress, no matter how small. We often move so quickly through life, checking things off a never-ending to-do list, that we forget to celebrate our victories. Waking up at 3 a.m. gives us the space to look back and see how far we've come. It's a moment to recognize the strength we've shown in difficult situations, the wisdom we've gained through challenges, and the growth we've experienced in our spiritual journey. These reflections serve as reminders of God's faithfulness and the ways he has been working in our lives, even when we couldn't see it in the moment. However, reflection isn't just about looking back. It's also about looking forward. In the stillness of 3 a.m., we are given the opportunity to dream, to envision what the future holds, and to pray for God's guidance in the decisions ahead. What dreams have we put on hold? What steps have we been avoiding? What do we feel called to do next? These early hours provide the clarity needed to discern God's will for our lives and the courage to move forward with faith. Ultimately, the time for reflection that comes with waking up at 3 a.m. is a sacred gift. It's a time to slow down, to be present with ourselves and with God, and to take stock of our lives. It's a moment to reflect on what we need to release, what we need to embrace, and how we can move forward with purpose and intention. While it can be difficult to wake up in the middle of the night, we can view it as a sacred invitation to reflect, both on where we've been and where we're going, and to allow God's presence to guide us into the next chapter of our lives. Spiritual vulnerability is a concept that can feel both unsettling and profound. It is the idea of being open and receptive to God in our most raw and unguarded state, allowing ourselves to fully embrace our need for him, even when we feel weak, lost, or unsure. When we wake up at 3 a.m. in the middle of the night, we often find ourselves in a state of vulnerability, both physically and emotionally. When the vulnerability that comes with waking up at such an hour when the world is silent and still creates an environment where we are not only open to our own emotions, but also to God's presence in a deeper way. In the quiet of the night, when we're alone with our thoughts, there is no hiding from ourselves. The facade we maintain during the day, the roles we play, the masks we wear, the distractions we rely on, often fall away. When we wake up in the stillness of 3 a.m., we are stripped of these distractions and forced to confront the state of our hearts and minds. We may find ourselves grappling with fear, regret, doubt, or loneliness. We might face the unresolved tensions or worries that have been suppressed throughout the day, but in this moment of vulnerability, God meets us. He invites us into a space where we don't have to hide, where we can be fully honest with ourselves and with him. This moment of vulnerability can be intimidating because it requires us to lay down our defenses. We might not want to confront the things we've been avoiding or acknowledge the areas of our lives that feel broken. But God is not distant or condemning in these moments. He is near, ready to meet us where we are. Spiritual vulnerability allows us to bring our imperfections, our pain, and our uncertainties into the light where they can be healed by his grace. It's in these moments that we truly experience God's love, not because we are perfect, but because we are willing to be vulnerable before him. One of the most profound aspects of spiritual vulnerability is that it invites us to relinquish control. Our lives are often filled with the need to manage, to direct, and to protect. We want to have answers, solutions, and the ability to handle everything on our own. But when we wake up in the middle of the night, when our minds are spinning with questions or anxiety, we are reminded that we are not in control. We are vulnerable to the uncertainties of life. And in that vulnerability, we find an opportunity to surrender. Surrendering our need for control and acknowledging our dependence on God can be a powerful act of spiritual vulnerability. It's when we release the illusion of control that we allow God to take the lead in our lives and show us the way forward. Spiritual vulnerability also creates space for God to speak into our lives in profound ways. In our moments of openness, when we are not trying to hide our feelings or project an image of strength, God can speak directly to the deepest parts of our hearts. We often think of God's voice as being loud and commanding, but more often than not, he speaks in whispers. He speaks in the quiet of our hearts, in the stillness of the night. At 3 a.m., we are more likely to hear God's voice clearly because there is nothing else competing for our attention. We are vulnerable, open, and receptive to his leading. It is in these moments of spiritual vulnerability that we can hear his whispers of comfort, encouragement, or guidance. Furthermore, being spiritually vulnerable before God allows us to experience a deeper sense of intimacy with him. We often think of intimacy as something that requires strength or perfection, something we can only experience when we have it all together. But spiritual intimacy thrives in moments of weakness, honesty, and openness. It is in our vulnerability that we draw closer to God, for it is in admitting our need for him that we invite his presence into our lives in a more intimate way. God doesn't want us to come to him as perfect beings, but as real people. People who are willing to be vulnerable and honest with him, even in the darkest of hours. Waking up at 3 a.m. often leads us into these moments of spiritual vulnerability. It is a time when we can no longer hide behind the busyness of our lives or our distractions. In the silence of the night, we are given the opportunity to open ourselves to God in ways that we might not have done during the day. These moments allow us to reflect on our fears, our desires, and our weaknesses, and to invite God into those places of vulnerability. It is in these raw moments that we experience his healing touch, his love, and his grace in ways that deepen our relationship with him. It is in our vulnerability that we come to know God in a more personal and profound way. In a world that thrives on noise, activity, and constant engagement, it's easy to overlook the moments when God is calling us. We live in an age of distractions. Our phones buzz, our to-do lists pile up, and the demands of daily life never seem to stop. Amidst all the noise, it's often difficult to hear God's voice, especially when we are constantly moving from one thing to the next. But there is a profound truth that many have discovered. God often calls us in the quiet. When we wake up at 3 a.m., the world around us is still. The noise of the day is gone, and we find ourselves in a place of solitude, stripped of the distractions that usually fill our waking hours. This is a moment of quiet that is not accidental. It is a sacred space where God can speak directly to our hearts, where we can hear his calling more clearly than we might during the busyness of the day. Often, it is in the stillness of the night that God's voice becomes most distinct, cutting through the noise and reaching us in ways that we may not expect. God's calling is not always a loud, thunderous proclamation. It is often a gentle whisper, a nudge in our spirit, or a subtle shift in our hearts. When we wake up in the middle of the night, our defenses are down. There are no external demands competing for our attention. We are vulnerable, open, and receptive to whatever God wants to reveal to us. This is the time when we can hear him most clearly. God speaks in the quiet because that is when we are least distracted, most attentive, and most willing to listen. Throughout the Bible, we see God calling his people in moments of quiet. Consider the story of Samuel in 1 Samuel 3. Samuel was just a boy serving in the temple under Eli, and one night he was called by name. At first, he didn't recognize the voice of God and thought it was Eli calling him. But after hearing the call multiple times, Samuel finally responded with the words, "Speak, for your servant is listening." 1 Samuel 3:10. It was in the stillness of the night, when the temple was quiet and everyone else was asleep, that God called Samuel. In that moment, Samuel was able to hear God's voice clearly, and his life was forever changed. The calling of Samuel is a powerful reminder that God often speaks in the quiet, not in the loud chaos of our lives. In fact, sometimes the noise of the world can drown out his voice, and we become so distracted by our own agendas and busyness that we fail to notice the gentle promptings of his spirit. But when we wake up at 3 a.m., we are offered a moment of reprieve, a chance to tune out the distractions and listen for God's voice. It is in the quiet of the night that we can hear his guidance most clearly, whether he is calling us to a new season, a new direction, or simply to rest in his presence. Moreover, when we are awake in the stillness of the night, we are more tuned to the internal stirrings of our hearts. Often these stirrings are God's way of calling us to something greater. He may be nudging us to forgive, to take a step of faith, to reach out to someone, or to make a difficult decision. These calls don't always come with immediate answers or clear directions, but they are invitations to trust him more deeply and to follow his lead. God's calling in the quiet is often subtle, but it's no less powerful. It may be a shift in our thoughts, a deep sense of peace, or an overwhelming sense of love and conviction. These are all ways in which God draws us closer to his will and invites us to participate in the plans he has for our lives. Another powerful aspect of God's calling in the quiet is that it allows for deeper reflection and discernment. In the hustle of our everyday lives, we often lack the space to truly reflect on God's purpose for us. We may be so focused on what needs to be done that we miss the invitation to pause and listen. But when we wake up at 3 a.m., the quiet allows us to reflect on our lives, to consider the decisions we're facing, and to seek God's guidance. In these moments, we have the opportunity to sit in his presence and hear from him with clarity and peace. God's calling in the quiet is also a reminder of his intimacy with us. It's not just about grand tasks or sweeping missions. It's about God's personal relationship with each one of us. He speaks to us in the quiet because he desires to draw near to us, to have an intimate conversation with us, and to lead us through the complexities of life. Waking up at 3 a.m. is an invitation to meet with God in a personal way, to listen for his voice, and to respond to his call with a heart that is open and willing. In the stillness of the night, we are given the chance to hear God's voice more clearly than we might in the busyness of the day. It is a sacred time when we can tune out the distractions of life and listen for the gentle calling of our Creator. God calls us in the quiet because that is when we are most ready to hear him. It is in these quiet moments that we can experience profound intimacy with God, hear his guidance, and discern the direction he wants us to take. The quiet at 3 a.m. is not a burden, but a divine invitation to listen, reflect, and follow God's calling with a heart full of faith and trust.